Hey everyone, I'm Ermysenigma. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to Monster Analysis. Up for analysis today is the Warrior. The Warrior has been a lonely soul ever since he got lost from his friend Linus in the forest. He still waits for him there, hunting dangerous creatures to kill time. If you welcome him into your community, you'll find that when you earn his trust, he's supportive and inspiring. Here we have the Warrior as a child, as a teen, as an adult. Overall, I really like this monster design. I found that more and more every single monster that Monster Legends is releasing, I'm really liking their designs. But enough about me and what designs I like, let's move on to the analysis. As of the time recording this video, there are a total of 25 Earth Legendary monsters, so I'm going to be comparing the Warrior to the rest of them. And so for power, the Warrior has a power of 3,476, and although that may not seem that high, I still say it's a pretty good power. As for life, the Warrior has a life of 30,763, and this actually puts him in 16th place along with monsters like Chin and Best That. And yes, 16th place, that is pretty low. 30,000, that seems pretty high number. Normally when we talk about other monsters, it's like under 30,000, but just because Earth monsters tend to be incredibly tanky, this is kind of considered on the low side for Earth monsters. And as for speed, the Warrior has a speed of 3,388, which puts him in 8th place along with monsters like Louie and Deadwolf. So all in all, stats wise, there's nothing really too amazing about this monster. And moving on to this trait, he's immune to stun, which what can I say, that's like one of the best immunities to have, especially for Earth monsters, considering a lot of the main skill that Earth monsters have to deny would be stun. And of course there's Mega Stun, but currently there's no monster immune to Mega Stun. So moving on to default, we have Dull Axe and Small Spear, nothing interesting there. Let's move on to the ultimate attack, the Hunt. Deals very heavy earth damage to all enemies, may give precision to all allies, may apply damage boost to all allies, may make all targets bleed. So the Hunt is an earth based skill that deals 60 damage to all of the enemy monsters, and it gives bleeding to the enemy monsters, and it gives precision and damage boost to yourself. I know the description says to your allies, but currently as of the time making this video, the Warrior is actually out in the Spotlight dungeon, and he's actually had a chance to use his ultimate against me, and he only gives precision and damage boost to himself. So in this case the description isn't that accurate. And overall, I do like this ultimate, although it's really nothing that amazing. Like I always say, this skill would have been special based instead of some element based. It could have been way better, just because you wouldn't have that weakness against earth monsters. But all in all, the Hunt will still be dealing 60 damage to all enemy monsters, and it's still going to give them bleeding, which means they lose 10% of their health, and their damage output would be released by 90% for the following 4 turns. Not that they've survived 4 turns. And on top of that, you do give a damage boost and precision, which means your next attack won't be missing and you're going to be buffed. So it's certainly good, but it's nothing really too amazing. In Skills Group 1, we have Gargantuan Axe, Sharp Spear, Rusty Shield, nothing interesting here. Let's move on over to Skills Group 2. Now, before I actually talk about them, you guys should know that the Warrior is one of those monsters. He's one of those monsters that you can realistically put any of the following skills and you're going to have a good monster. There's no ideal skill set, there's no best skill set. It's ultimately just going to come to an individual preference. Do you like AoEs? Do you like effects? Do you like strong skills? Do you like shields? It's whatever you want to build them for. And it's somewhat going to be the same for runes. You can give this monster 2 strength runes and a speed rune, or you can make him a little more tanky, give him at least 1 life rune, so 1 life, 1 strength, 1 speed. There are so many ways to build this monster. So with that being said, I'm going to do my best to discuss each of the different skills, give you pros and cons, but ultimately at the end of the day, it's going to be up to you to decide what skill set you would run on this monster. So let's jump right into it. Titanic Axe. Deals heavy special damage, may stun target, requires cooldown. Titanic Axe targets a single enemy, it deals 50 damage, it's a special based attack, it costs 28 stamina, has a 1 turn cooldown, and it stuns. And this is basically everything I would want in a skill. It deals a nice amount of damage, 50, the stamina cost isn't too high, it's 28, that's normal. The cooldown is only 1 turn, so even though the skill isn't spammable, that's kind of okay because after you stun a monster, you can't stun it again on the following turn. You're gonna have to wait until the next turn. Now of course if it was 0 cooldown, you'd be able to target different monsters, but I'm gonna let it pass because this is a special base skill, meaning you can use this against the enemy earth monster and they're gonna take the 50 damage, they're not gonna be taking like 25 damage. Now of course a lot of earth monsters tend to be immune to stun, so you probably wouldn't target the earth monster, but still, it's a really great skill. And if anything, maybe you're not even trying to stun the earth monster, maybe you're just using the skill to deal that 50 damage. So it's a pretty good skill, one you definitely want to consider running. Sharp Spears is the next skill in Skills Group 2, deals moderate earth damage to all enemies, may make all targets bleed, requires cooldown. So this is an AoE earth based attack that deals 35 damage to all of the enemy monsters, it costs 37 stamina, it has a 3 turn cooldown, and all of the enemy monsters will give bleeding. And for some reason till this day, still no monster is immune to bleeding, which is an amazing negative effect. It's essentially the same as poison. So the enemy's life will be reduced by 10% for the following 4 turns, and their damage output is reduced by 90% for the following 4 turns. And considering you'll sometimes encounter a very tanky earth monster on defense, maybe you'll encounter an Oros with like 2 really high level runes, the best way to get rid of those monsters is by using DOTs, such as bleeding. And if you ever find yourself in a team wars that's like nature and earth, That can be an extremely difficult war because the earth monster is tanky, the nature monster has healing skills, but with bleeding you're cutting away a percentage of their life, so it doesn't matter how much life they have, they're still going to be losing 10% every single turn for 4 turns. Again, this is a skill you may want to consider running. The next skill is Hard Shield. Gives a 50% shield to target, may give double damage to ally, requires cooldown. So this skill targets one of your allies, it costs 27 stamina and it has a 3-turn cooldown. To me personally, this cooldown is a little too high, because all your monster gets is a big shield, which is a 50% shield that lasts for 2 turns, and they get double damage, which also lasts for 2 turns. Now this skill could actually be a pretty good supportive build. You could technically run the warrior as a supportive monster, and you'd probably be able to use him in a scenario where the team warrior requirement is legendary for the rarity, because in that case you could use the warrior with all team speed runes, you could run an attacker for a legendary, and then you could run a deny monster for the other element, and it could work out. Or even in a basic earth war, this could be a pretty nice skill to apply on yourself. You get yourself a shield and you have double damage and you have some pretty strong attacks. But as far as doing that, I'm a little less of a fan of it, just because if you were to give this monster like 2 strength runes, you'd probably want to utilize skills that take advantage of the strength runes immediately, as opposed to using your own monster to buff himself. Because in that time that you buff yourself, a lot of things can happen. Now of course you can kind of remedy that if you have a deny monster, but how many deny monsters can actually deny the enemy team for 2 turns successfully? Not that many. So it's kind of hard to balance it. Of all the skills, this is probably my least favorite, unless you're going for a really supportive warrior build, which I'll talk about a little later, but you know, it's like I said, at the end of the day, it's going to come down to preference. So with that said, on to skills group 3, Enchanted Axe. Deals very heavy special damage, 50% chance of making target bleed, 50% chance of stunning target, 50% chance of blinding target, requires cooldown. Enchanted Axe is a special based attack that deals 65 damage to a single enemy monster, it costs 31 stamina, and surprisingly it only has a 1-turn cooldown. And I say surprisingly because this skill does a lot. It gives bleeding, it gives blind, it gives stun. However, it is only a 50% chance to do each of the effects, but considering it's 3 effects, come on, at least one of them has to land, maybe even 2 of them. It's probably going to be rare when all 3 land, but it could happen. And so overall, this skill is pretty darn amazing. If this skill was just special based, dealt 65 damage and had a 1-turn cooldown, I would like it. But this skill even goes beyond that. So anyways, if you give this monster 2 high level strength runes, you're pretty much going to one hit whatever enemy monster you want. Maybe not the enemy earth monster just because they tend to be extremely tanky. Well then again, it also depends on the runes, right? But anyways, assuming you don't one hit the enemy monster, there's a chance to give it bleeding, and then that bleeding could potentially kill it because that's 10% of the enemy monster's life. Or it could potentially stun the enemy monster if they survive, and if they're stunned they're going to be immobilized, so on the following turn you can wipe them out. Or if you don't stun, you could potentially blind them, so even if they do try to hit you, because they're blinded they may miss. So overall, I really like this skill. If I had to name one skill as a must-have, I would say it's Enchanted Axe. But anyways, the next skill is Brutal Javelins. Deals moderate earth damage to all enemies, destroys all enemy shields, requires cooldown. So Brutal Javelins is an earth-based AoE that deals 45 damage to all of the enemy monsters. It costs 37 stamina, it has a 3-turn cooldown, and it obliterates all of the enemy shields, which is the perfect counter to General Tomb and his full team shield skill. And it's kind of funny that General Tomb is actually faster than the warrior, because in Team Wars, if the warrior and General Tomb had the exact same runes on them, then the enemy Tomb would go first, and there's a chance that the enemy Tomb will give his team a shield, which means on the following turn you can get rid of those shields. So the fact that the warrior has a slower speed, that actually works in his favor. And if you're specifically making an attacker warrior, or even a supportive warrior, you definitely need this skill just to counter the Tomb. And the last skill we have is Unbreakable Shield. Gives a 40% shield to all targets, may apply damage boost to all allies, requires cooldown. So this skill is a team skill which costs 40 stamina, which is kind of high, it has a 3-turn cooldown, also pretty high, and it gives your whole team a medium shield, and it gives your whole team a damage boost. And so a medium shield is equivalent to a 40% shield, and a damage boost will increase your damage output by 50%. And between Unbreakable Shield and the skill from Skills Group 2, I would have to say that I kind of prefer Unbreakable Shield more, just because this also protects your rarity monster. One of the hardest things to do in Team Wars is to protect your rarity monster. Well, thank goodness that this monster has a 40% shield. Now of course you could use the other skill from Skills Group 2 and give that monster a 50% shield, but do you really want to give your rarity monster double damage? Because for one, if that monster is extremely slow, it probably won't be getting a turn in anytime soon, and two, considering it's a rarity monster, keep in mind that you're going up against legendary monsters, so the damage output that monster can potentially deal against a legendary isn't going to be that very high. So unless your rarity monster happens to be an epic or legendary, it's not really going to benefit that much from double damage. I think it's way better to run Unbreakable Shield, give your whole team a medium shield, and give your whole team a damage boost. But like I said before talking about these skills, it really comes down to preference. You can pretty much run whatever you like, any of these 6 skills, and you're going to have a pretty good warrior. So let's start off simple by talking about the warrior if he's supposed to be an attacker, which he would run 2 strength runes and a speed rune. The skill set for that warrior would be Enchanted Axe, Brutal Javelins, and Sharp Spears. For the 4th and final skill, it'd either have to be Titanic Axe, or Unbreakable Shields, and again, it really comes down to preference, with myself leaning more towards Unbreakable Shields just in case for whatever reason if I need that little damage boost and if I need that shield to protect my rarity monster. But if you're not really too concerned about that, then go ahead and run Titanic Axe. It's 50 damage, it's special based, and it stuns. This can definitely come in handy in a number of situations. And now let's say you wanted to run a supportive warrior, and in this case what I mean by supportive is a monster that's going to be running all team speedruns, and the reason they're going to be running team speedruns is to help your deny monster go first, so this could only work in a scenario where it's legendary for the rarity. And I very rarely suggest that you give a legendary monster all team speedruns or like 2 team speedruns and 1 speedrun, but the reason you want to do this is if your enemy happens to have better runes than you, but maybe they don't have as many team speed on their other monsters, in which case you can give your deny monster by giving team speed to your legendary monsters instead of your basic like speed or strength runes. But anyways, if it's the case that warrior is running all team speed runes, he really doesn't have that much of a need to have strong skills, in which case you want to focus on skills that have effects or DOTs, so you definitely want to run sharp spears, Titanic Axe, brutal javelins, and unbreakable shields. So I actually think that's better. Instead of doing 3 team speedruns, you want to give this monster 2 team speedruns and 1 speedrun. And the reason you want to do that is so you can take advantage of hard shield and brutal javelins, and you want to make sure that this monster is faster than your attacker monster. That way you can apply that double damage to your attacker, and then your attacker has an easier time to wiping out the enemy team. And another reason you want him to outspeed your attacker is because of brutal javelins. If you face off an enemy at tomb and he gives his team a life shield, then you want to be sure to remove that shield before your attacker gets a turn in. And you also want to be sure to run Titanic Axe just in case you need to immobilize. And for the last and final skill, it's either going to be sharp spears or unbreakable shields, but once again it ultimately comes down to preference. Both of these skills have their advantages and disadvantages. If you imagine that most of the games you're going to start off with either hard shields to boost your attacker or brutal javelins to get rid of shields the enemy monster may have, then after your attacker attacks and once it's the warrior's turn again, you probably don't really need an AoE that gives bleeding, because by then there's probably only going to be 1 or 2 monsters alive left and they're probably going to be pretty weak, which means you'd probably be better off like immobilizing one of the enemy monsters with Titanic Axe, so sharp spears you may not need it. But likewise, this go to be the final nail in the coffin because you could give the enemies bleeding and reduce their damage output, which would reduce the amount of damage they deal to you. But of course another viable option after all that happens is to run Unbreakable Shields, and you give all of your monsters a shield just to increase their survivability, and you also get a damage boost which will make it easier to defeat them. So you honestly can't go wrong with either skill. And the final skill set I would recommend if you're making a warrior for defensive purposes, and I probably wouldn't recommend using the warrior on defensive purposes, not because he isn't good, but just because there's better monsters like the obvious General Tomb or Brontis. But if you're just starting off the game and you don't have that many monsters and you happen to have the warrior, then I would recommend running sharp spears, Titanic Axe, enchanted axe, and unbreakable shields. And this is just because whatever the AI actually does, whatever skill he chooses, it's going to be pretty good. If he uses unbreakable shields, your whole team gets a 40% shield and a damage boost, so the next attack will be 50% stronger. Enchanted Axe, it's 65 damage, special based, it has a lot of effects. Titanic Axe is 50 damage and it immobilizes, and Sharp Spears is an AoE bleeding. So once again, no matter what skill the AI chooses, it's going to be doing something to the enemy team. And if you do choose to use this monster on defense, you could always go the 1 strength, 1 speed, and 1 life route, or you could even go the 3 speed route. But once again, this monster isn't the fastest, and even General Tomb outspeeds him, but at least General Tomb can't stun him. Now of course there's Brontis who can mega stun, but your speed is actually faster than Brontis, so if both monsters actually had 3 speed runes, then Brontis shouldn't be going before the warrior. But in real game that rarely ever happens. Most of the time one team has way better runes than the other team, and you could always manipulate the speed of your monsters by applying team speed to your other monsters. So once again, the warrior may not be the best option to put on defense, but he is a viable option. And with that being said, that is going to conclude my analysis on the warrior. Please let me know what you thought about this analysis, and more importantly, let me know what you think about this monster and what skill set you're going to be running. What kind of build are you going to be running? There are so many different ways to make this monster. There are so many different variations, combinations, so please let me know in the comments below. What are you going to be doing with your warrior, or what would you do with the warrior if you had one? With that being said, thank you all for watching. Remember to dream big and pursue your passions.